Welcome back to Filling in the History. I am the amateur historian. It is great to be back with you again this week. We are going to be talking about sections 106 to 108. But there's quite a difference in this episode that I hope comes through. It actually covers a period of time for 3 revelations, but this means the first revelation is in November, and then the next one is in May, and then the next one is in December. So we're blowing through about a year of church history, and I'm going to try to do it in a very short amount of time. There's a lot of extra documents now. We're kind of getting to the point where there's enough outside of the revelations that I'm going to try to make this very succinct. However, I have made a rule that anytime that we have an unpublished revelation, we read it out loud. So there is one portion of this that might be a little long, but otherwise, that's where we are. So a lot of summarized material. And just so you know, if you're following along, we are now in Documents Volume 4 of the Joseph Smith Papers. And so let's talk about some of the documents leading up to Section 106 of the Doctrine and Covenants today. So a couple of summaries. Number one is we get a resolution from the people of Lafayette, Missouri, to defend against any foreign Mormons in support of the people of Independence, Missouri. So there's resolutions flying back and forth, and I guess another town was ready to fight for independence against those nasty foreign Mormons. So there you go. High Priest Council, the next thing we get is where Edward Partridge, William W. Phelps, Isaac Morley, John Corrill, John Whitmer, David Whitmer, Sidney Rigdon, Peter Whitmer, Simeon Carter, Newell Knight, Thomas B. Marsh, Lyman White, Parley P. Pratt, Christian Whitmer, Solomon Hancock are all chosen to receive their endowments once the temple is complete in Kirtland, which is pretty special. Now, I know that there's a couple of things that happened outside of the temple walls kind of before the actual temple was dedicated. And so these are a smattering of men that you may recognize. Hopefully you recognize those voices by now. Those names by now. If you know their voices, call me up. That'd be really weird. Anyway, we also get a letter after this to John Thornton and others enumerating their issues during Zion's camp. This was probably sent to their attorneys, more or less, to gain redress for their wrongs, right? On the 3rd of July, 1834, we get the minutes of a kind of a general council of high priests that says that they can settle issues that a bishop and counselors cannot settle. So if your bishop and counselors can't do it, then it gets sent up to the high priest general council. And today I would generally call this, and I'm sure this may be modified since then, would now be called the stake high council or the standing high council. We get a meeting on the 7th of July on how to train new council of high priests and how to discharge their duties. And then we get a discourse, which I thought was kind of interesting. It says this from the minutes, quote, after which Brother Joseph Smith, Jr. proceeded to give the council such instruction relative to their high calling as would enable them to proceed and minister in their office, agreeable to the pattern given heretofore. Also read to them the revelation speaking on the subject. He also informed them, if he should now be taken away, that he had accomplished the great work which the Lord had laid before him, and that which he had desired of the Lord, and that he now had done his duty in organizing the high council, through which council the will of the Lord might be known in all important occasions in the building up of Zion and establishing truth in the earth. For some reason, setting these councils up, I mean, he basically said, like, I can die now. And so that kind of shows the importance of these councils and this idea that I guess the Lord wants to talk in councils where two or more are gathered, the famous phrase, right? So a very important moment for Joseph Smith, apparently. We then get a receipt for $10. You got that? Enjoy it. There's a receipt for $10. After this, we get a meeting on the 11th of August, 1834, while Sylvester Smith was called out for misconduct and criminal activity on Zion's camp. We don't know what that was. Sylvester agreed to and produced an apology, which was published in the Messenger and Advocate. So Sylvester got busted, had to write an apology in the newspaper for all to see. After this, we get a letter to Lyman White reviewing what had happened to Sylvester Smith and encouraging and instructing members to try to regain their lands in Missouri. We get a meeting on August 23rd to finalize a publication in the Star about Sylvester Smith's trial and such. And then on the 23rd of August, next day, the resolution to print what they wrote in the Evening and Morning Star. So, a lot of stuff around Sylvester Smith and what had happened to him. We get a letter from William W. Phelps. This is from him, published in the Evening and Morning Star. And this letter updates people on the happenings in Missouri. The state trying to get a little bit more land from the federal government. I guess this was a thing back then when states were new. Treaties between the native nations and the U.S. government, and some other items. So that's what you get. On the 20th and 29th of August, we get a meeting where Sylvester gets everything written and then goes back on his word, justifies his former behavior, and kind of doesn't want to be apologetic anymore. He's like, no, forget that. I don't apologize for any of it. I did it, I tell you. So Joseph Smith actually recuses himself from his position on the church court because the claims were against him. So he says, okay, well, since you're accusing me, I can't be judging this, obviously, or else I'll just tell you to get out of here. But we do get this from the historical introduction to the meeting minutes here. It says, however, Smith may not have been satisfied with the decision of the council. Although he signed a statement acknowledging the justness of the council's decisions, someone, likely Sylvester Smith himself, as the handwriting resembles his, later crossed out his name and wrote under it, the above was signed for fear of punishment. This may have occurred in 1836 when Smith was temporarily serving as Joseph Smith's scribe. So this guy gets a hold of the records because he's scribing, and he kind of flips back in the book, crosses it out. He's like, this was kind of dirty what they did to me, which I think that's kind of fun. Anyway, Sylvester Smith, because of this, was removed from his council position, but maintained his sort of priesthood office, if you will. But he was no longer on the council because of that. Little stunt. Next thing we get is a Church of Christ account papers with debits and credits. Now, I was super tempted to go through and read off to you every debit and every credit, but I would assume that you probably don't want me to do that. We also get one for the Camp of Israel, some account pages here, I guess, to make sure that their debts and their credits and debits were all on the level. On the 8th of September, we had a meeting, which could be called an area conference or a state conference today. Joseph Smith comes out, gives instructions, trains leaders, and gives his interesting teaching about speaking in tongues. Now, I find this very interesting, so I'm just going to read this off from the minutes. It was that a certain brother carpenter had been tried for a fault before the church. When the church gave him a certain time to reflect whether he would acknowledge or not, Brother Gordon at the time spake in tongues and declared that Brother Carpenter should not have any lenity, maybe leniency, I'm not sure. He, Brother Palmer, wished instruction on this point, whether they had proceeded right or not, as Brother Carpenter was dissatisfied, etc. Brother Joseph then proceeded to give an explanation of the gift of tongues, that it was particularly instituted for the preaching of the gospel in other nations and languages, but it was not given for the government of the church. He further said, if Brother Gordon introduced the gift of tongues as a testimony against Brother Carpenter, that it was contrary to the rules and regulations of the church, because in all our decisions, we must judge from actual testimony. Brother Gordon said the testimony was had and the decision given before the gift of tongues was manifested. Brother Joseph advised that we speak in our own language in all such matters, and then the adversary cannot lead our minds astray. So I bet you didn't know that about speaking in tongues. It is only for preaching the gospel, and you can't use it to accuse somebody of a crime, which thing I had never before supposed. All right, moving on, we get a letter to Oliver Cowdery, published in the Evening and Morning Star, talking about Alexander Campbell and his efforts against the church. In this case, Joseph was kind of letting this go, but Joseph really comes out against Alexander Campbell, which is kind of odd because he was relatively silent. And actually, Alexander Campbell hadn't really published anything for a while about this. And so Joseph, in this open letter to Oliver Cowdery, really slams him and kind of digs up some harsh feelings, as we'll see in a moment. We get a meeting on the 24th of September, deciding that Sylvester Smith will stay a high priest but lose his council seats. Hiram Smith is the replacement, which happens a lot to Hiram, actually. Somebody gets removed and Hiram takes their place, so here you go again. It is also sort of resolved to publish the Revelations, since the Book of Commandments effort was destroyed. And there was a lot of talk about the importance of publishing and sharing these revelations. So from the minutes, I thought you might enjoy this. It says, the council then decided that said committee, after arranging and publishing said Book of Covenants, have the avails of the same. So you get half of it there, the Book of Covenants. And we'll get to what they almost named it. And if you don't remember, the doctrine part of the Doctrine and Covenants was what we now call the Lectures on Faith. So that was added at time of publication. Moving on from here, we get a letter to Moses Daly on the 8th of October, 1834, letting them know that William McClellan was on his way to preach to their branch. So basically, there's a letter to Moses and says, hey, Brother McClellan is on his way to your branch to preach and help you out. We then get a letter from Alva Tippett, which is on the 20th of October, talking about the redemption of Zion and their efforts to collect money to help out in that effort. So that's nice. Then we get a letter to George James on the 10th of November, telling him to come to Kirtland to face charges against him that he had not served his mission as commanded. Apparently, he was supposed to accompany Joseph Smith himself, and he never did. Not really sure what happened to that. But he was one of the first elders to be endowed in Kirtland in 1836, so about 2 years after this. So I guess he was in good standing in the church by that time, but apparently he was called to the carpet for not serving his mission. And when your companion is going to be, or one of your companions is going to be the prophet himself, I suppose they noticed. So that's a ton of history. And now we're going to light into the next thing that we get, which is section 106, which is the very last canonized section that we get from 1834. So we're kind of at the end of the year here. The earliest copy that we get is in Revelation Book 2. This is the handwriting of Oliver Cowdery. It's a pretty short revelation. There is one big correction, which is the addition of, this is Oliver Cowdery's brother, and he adds Warren's last name. So Cowdery, that's the big change that you get. It is called section 99 in the original Doctrine and Covenants. And now we're into what's called Manuscript History, Volume B. And I'm just mentioning this because I'm not going to mention it much again. This was after Joseph died. And therefore, just for the sake of not including absolutely everything, because that would be like way too much, this I normally put off because it was not actually done during Joseph Smith's lifetime. But now we are in Volume 2 of the History of the Church because of it. That is why I say, and it's in there. We get some introductions here. The earliest copy gives us simply Kirtland, November 25th, 1834. Doctrine and Covenants simply states Revelation given November 1834. And our manuscript history copy says, I continued my labors daily, preparing for the school, etc., and received the following revelation concerning Warren A. Cowdery, given November 25th, 1834. There is no difference in the modern section headings, but the historical introduction gives us a few things. It says, Warren Cowdery, who lived in Freedom, New York, had been baptized in the church sometime between May and September of 1834. So really very new. Before his baptism, he had sympathized with the saints plight in Missouri. He had also opened his home to Joseph Smith when Joseph Smith and others came to Freedom in March of 1834 to recruit members for the camp of Israel. Shortly after Joseph Smith's visit, a branch of the church was established in Freedom. When Parley P. Pratt visited the area in April of 1834, he noted that a large church was there, consisting of some 40 members or more, many of whom had been baptized by Orson Pratt. Sometime after his own baptism, Warren Cowdery noted that the members of the church in Freedom were in need of a preacher of our order who could do us good by strengthening and building us up in the most holy faith. Although he seemed to be calling for an elder to be sent to the branch, he may have meant that the branch needed a presiding authority, the position to which he was called in this revelation. In an October 1834 letter, he told Oliver that he had, quote, had thoughts of requesting you to inquire what is the will of the Lord concerning me, unquote, stating that he sometimes thought he could be, quote, useful in the vineyard of the Lord, unquote. This revelation was apparently dictated after Oliver received Warren's letter. In addition to designating Warren as a presiding high priest in Freedom, the revelation gave admonitions and promises to him and provided instructions concerning the second advent of Jesus Christ. Now, what's really interesting about this, and this wasn't uncommon, but Warren actually wasn't even present for the reception of this revelation. This was done outside of his presence, and, you know, he got it later on. But kind of special. So Oliver's brother joins the church and wants to be useful in the vineyard. So some content and so forth from this. Most of the footnotes are scriptural references in Documents Volume 3 and Volume 4, excuse me. The portion of the revelation reads this. It says, "It is my will that my servant Warren should receive and be appointed and ordained a presiding high priest over my church in the land of freedom and the regions round about, and should preach my everlasting gospel, and lift up his voice and warn the people, not only in his own place, but in the adjoining countries, and devote his whole time in this high and holy calling, which I now give unto him, seeking diligently the kingdom of heaven and its righteousness, and all things necessary shall be added thereunto, for the laborer is worthy of his hire." And the last portion of this states, "And again, verily I say unto you, there was joy in heaven when my servant Warren bowed to my scepter and separated himself from the crafts of men. Therefore, blessed is my servant Warren, for I will have mercy on him, and notwithstanding the vanity of his heart, I will lift him up, and inasmuch as he will humble himself before me, I will give unto him grace and assurance wherewith he may stand. And if he continues to be a faithful witness and a light unto the church, I have prepared a crown for him in the mansion of my Father. Even so, amen." So because we don't really get any footnotes from that, I thought I'd just give a portion of the revelation, and that is all that we have for part one. So lots of history, a little bit of drama. Sylvester Smith is going to become a scribe again, which is kind of interesting considering all the drama there. But yeah, for part two, we're going to be getting into a very, very big revelation. This is section 107. So stay with us. Okay, for our second part here, we're going to be getting into section 107. So here's a lot of documents leading up to it. For summaries, we are still in 1834, and on the 28th of November, we get a meeting where the High Council meets up with two cousins by the name of John and Joseph Tibbets. They're from Lewis, New York, and there's a branch in Lewis, New York. They were baptized members and wanted to join the Saints in Missouri. And so basically they got a bunch of money that they needed, and they were like, okay, we're going to go to Kirtland, and then they're going to tell us where we're moving to in Missouri. So they stopped to find out what they needed to do. And if you haven't been following along, they were told to stay in Kirtland for the winter. And because the Lewis branch didn't really need the money to go to Zion anymore or to buy land, they decided to loan it to the church. And there was a promise to pay it back, by Joseph and Oliver, more or less. Anyway, so it could have gone to the debts for building the house of the Lord. It could have gone to other debts or whatever may have happened with that. But either way, lots of amazing praise in the minutes of these meetings for this like very timely gift. These guys just show up with all this money, and they're like, well, there's nothing in Missouri. If you're okay with it, we'd love to borrow that money to take care of the church. So it's pretty kind of miraculous thing that happens there. We get a journal entry and a covenant, which is interesting. 29th of November, almost at the end of the year. It's the handwriting of Oliver Cowdery, and it has some signatures by Joseph and Oliver. The historical introduction says this. On the 29th of November, 1834, Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery signed a covenant that Cowdery recorded in Joseph Smith's journal, pledging that a tenth of all that God gave them would be given to the poor of the church or used for other purposes designated by God. Joseph Smith and Cowdery were prompted to make the covenant in gratitude for a loan they received the previous day. So these people coming, these Tippets cousins coming with all this money had such an effect on them that they actually wrote down a specific covenant and signed it and said, we're going to do good with this. So in the text itself, you get this. After conversing and rejoicing before the Lord on this occasion, we agreed to enter into the following covenant with the Lord, viz., that if the Lord will prosper us in our business and open the way before us, that we may obtain means to pay our debts, that we be not troubled nor brought unto disrepute before the world nor his people, that after that of all that he shall give us, we will give a tenth, to be bestowed upon the poor in his church, or as he shall command, and that we will be faithful over that which he has entrusted to our care. that we may obtain much, and that our children after us shall remember to observe this sacred and holy covenant after us, and that our children and our children's may know of the same. We here subscribe our names with our own hands before the Lord. Joseph Smith, Jr., Oliver Cowdery. So, very welcome. We get an unpublished revelation. Holy cow. This is going to be on the 5th of December. This is Joseph Smith, coming out of Joseph Smith's history. So this is the handwriting of Oliver Cowdery, a very clean copy. But this is one of the history books that Oliver helped to make. The historical introduction behind this says, according to the minutes featured here, on the 5th of December, the presidency of the High Priesthood held a meeting to ordain Cowdery as an assistant president, second only to Joseph Smith. The meeting continued the next day with Hiram Smith and Joseph Smith Sr. also being ordained as assistant presidents. So Cowdery and Rigdon had managed the church while Joseph was off with Zion's camp, if you don't know. Who was running things? It was Oliver Cowdery and Sidney Rigdon were running it while Joseph was heading off the Zion's camp expedition. So further into this we get, though the minutes of the meeting indicate that Cowdery's ordination as an assistant president was done, quote, according to the direction of the Holy Spirit, it was apparently not done in response to a recorded revelation which had initiated all previous changes to the presidency. The ordination was, however, evidently in keeping with Cowdery's previous designation as second elder to Joseph Smith. You also get the ordaining of the church patriarch. It says here, Cowdery later implied that he, Joseph Smith, Rigdon, and Williams also ordained Joseph Smith Sr. to the office of church patriarch at these 5th or 6th December meetings, though the minutes do not mention this. So we don't really get that. And we do get a chiding in the Revelation. It says this. The Revelation reprimanded them for the informal, casual nature of interaction and discourse that had come to characterize the relationships of church members, of church leaders with each other and other members of the church. Minutes of meetings held prior to this time refer to Joseph Smith and other church leaders by their first names. But after receiving the rebuke, the presidency decided that this informality was inappropriate and that the leaders needed to be called by, quote, their respective titles. Although it is difficult to ascertain how church members referred to church leaders in everyday conversation after this time, meeting minutes thereafter show more formality, referring to Joseph Smith and other members of the presidency as president. So, we read unpublished revelation, so here you go. Verily, condemnation resteth upon you who are appointed to lead my church and to be saviors of men, and also upon the church. And there must needs be a repentance and a reformation among you in all things, in your ensamples before the church and before the world, in all your manners, habits, and customs, and salutations one toward another, rendering unto every man the respect due the office and calling and priesthood whereunto I the Lord have appointed and ordained you. Amen. You only get one footnote to that. It refers to Doctrine and Covenants 103:9, and that little verse reads, for they were set to be a light unto the world and to be the saviors of men. So the aftermath of this, well, I would say this is probably one of the bigger unpublished revelation impacts. Because to this day in the church, we are very big on titles. Like when you go on your mission, you are called sister. You are called elder. You do not use first names. We refer to elders as the 70s or the apostles. Bishops, a lot of people even call bishops bishop after they're done acting in that. What we don't do is say like Patriarch Smith. We'll usually say Brother Smith or something like that. But even then, even when we talk to each other, a lot of the times in church settings specifically, we don't use first names. So this unpublished revelation that you may not have ever heard of had an enormous impact on the church. So I thought that was pretty fun. All right, let's get going on with some more stuff. So we have an ordination of Oliver Cowdery on the 5th of December to be the assistant president of the church with many blessings attached. This is a pretty long one. We then get a full account of the meetings that happened on the 5th and 6th of December, where we have the revelation and ordination and all that kind of stuff still wrapped up sort of in that big meeting. We'll spare you the details of that. We also get a blessing from Joseph Sr. to his son on the 9th of December, recorded in a new patriarchal blessing book. And Oliver Cowdery did the handwriting of this. So this is 3 days after being ordained as the patriarch. And what happened is Joseph Sr. called his family to him to give blessings. They were arranged according to their age, and then they had a feast. So it's quite a special family occasion. And this included spouses, by the way, just if that's not clear. Anyway, and we get some issues with the recorded blessings. It says in an 1835 letter, Edward Partridge wrote about the recording of his own patriarchal blessing from Joseph Smith Sr. Partridge noted that the blessing was not delivered and written sentence by sentence, but that Smith delivered them as fast as he naturally speaks. That in the meantime, Partridge continued, the heads were sketched down, and they had to be filled out from memory. This blessing and the others given on the 9th of December represent some of the few early blessings from Joseph Smith Sr. for which a record exists. According to an 1859 history of the patriarchal blessing book, quote, a considerable number of blessings which were given by that patriarch were not recorded through negligence of the scribes, unquote. So Joseph Sr. wasn't really used to having somebody scribe his words, so he just was like, he just kind of went for it. But anyway, kind of a fun thing. And from that, we get a patriarchal blessing to Joseph, which is very beautiful. We get a patriarchal blessing to Emma Smith, which is gorgeous. If you get a chance to read that. And there's a lot of very heartfelt and personal things in there. So really fun. After that, we get a deed from Leonard and Keziah Rich on Christmas Eve. So that transfers land to the church. We get a meeting on the 28th of December. So this is 3 days after Christmas. That was going to help resolve a couple of financial disputes between certain members of the church. Oliver Cowdery came down pretty hard on the meeting members and said, you got to use proper titles, okay, because we just had a revelation about that. After this, we get a letter to Oliver Cowdery in December sometime, which is published in the Messenger and Advocate. And this open letter reads like Joseph Smith history, really. It includes discussing his early life, stopped short of anything other than defending his character and being a person with self-control and respect in response to a lot of anti-Mormon publications at the time. So he doesn't get into like the first vision, and he doesn't get into the Book of Mormon. But he does say like, this is how I was raised. This is where I'm from. Stop going to my hometown and making up crap about me. So there you go. And thus ends 1834. That is huge. Now, our new one, this is the biggest year yet for the Joseph Smith papers. We have 161 documents in 1835 that still exist today. Most of these are actually blessings given to various members of the church, and they were written down as part of meeting minutes. So quite frankly, I'm going to skip most of that because it's a blessing of a calling, and it's kind of rinse and repeat for a lot of it. And for the sake of time, we just can't go through all those things. So some summaries. We're now in 1835. We'll start with a meeting on the 18th of January where the council heard a case about a group from Bolton, New York who wanted to go to Missouri, or if they should stay in Kirtland. There's only a reference to John Tanner, who is a wealthy member who winds up having a massive influence on the church to this day, I might add. John Tanner, there was actually a film made about him that the church produced. Was a very wealthy man, had a very miraculous experience where he was healed. And his funds probably kept the church from going into bankruptcy, kept the Kirtland Temple in the possession of the church while they were still there. He was a major figure, lost almost everything because he gave and gave and gave so much to the church. His son, and Eldon Tanner, or maybe it was his grandson, I forget the relationship there, became an apostle and a member of the First Presidency. And my family, believe it or not, actually has some ties back to him in a manner of speaking. So yeah, kind of cool. So historical introduction for this says, according to a later account, Tanner sold his land in Bolton in fall of 1834, quote, preparatory to moving to Missouri in the coming spring. In December, he received an impression by dream of vision of the night that he was needed and must go immediately to the church in the West. On the 25th of December, he departed for Kirtland, arriving there in mid-January. So Merry Christmas. I'm out of here. So if you get a chance, there is a film about John Tanner. It's really amazing. I really like what they did with it. Anyway, all that to be said, the council told Tanner to stay in Kirtland and help with the temple. So historical introduction also says, Joseph Smith's journal records that on the evening of the 30th of November, he prophesied, quote, that in a short time the Lord would arrange his providences in a merciful manner and provide assistance to deliver him and others from debt and bondage. Nathan Tanner's later history implies that his father, John Tanner, provided such assistance by giving Joseph Smith a $2,000 loan, which was used to stave off foreclosure on the House of the Lord property, although it meant that Joseph Smith was then in debt to Tanner. So there was an implication here, and this is why these stories are really special, that Joseph basically stood up and said, I prophesy something's going to happen that's going to help us. And then John Tanner shows up about 2 months later. All right. Footnote to this entry we get, while in Kirtland, John Tanner apparently invested in the Kirtland Safety Society and made, quote, liberal donations to the building of the temple. Nathan Tanner also stated at some point his father loaned the committee responsible for constructing the house of the Lord $13,000 in merchandise at cost prices in New York. In addition, Tanner signed a note with the prophet Joseph and others for $30,000 for goods purchased in New York, which he had no pecuniary interest. No contemporary loans or records of these loans are extant, so that might just be a story. All right, so we get a meeting and a discourse and some blessings. This is on the 14th and 15th of February, 1835, and I am an amateur historian. I don't know if Valentine's Day was a thing back then. I think it might have been still a Catholic feast holiday, but anyway, Valentine's Day. And they meet at a schoolhouse where Joseph Smith presided and called up Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris. These are the three witnesses to the Book of Mormon to call the 12 apostles. So this is a big meeting. So we're going to pause here and dive in a little bit. Historical introduction for this says, the later reminiscence of Brigham and Joseph Young provide more detail. According to Brigham, while he and his brother were singing, Joseph Smith received a revelation declaring that 12 apostles were to be called, quote, from those who have been up to Zion, unquote. Joseph Young later stated that Joseph Smith told the brothers he had received a vision of the glorious reward of those members of the camp of Israel who had perished from cholera. Joseph Smith then asked Brigham to, quote, notify all the brethren living in the branches within a reasonable distance from this place to meet at a general conference on Saturday next, unquote. At that conference, Joseph Smith stated he would, quote, then and there appoint 12 special witnesses to open the door of the gospel to foreign nations, unquote. According to Joseph Young, Joseph Smith then told Brigham that he would be one of the 12 selected. Now, the assignment was given to the three witnesses, but there's a little bit of nudging here, and this is going to become a problem later. Anyway, historical introduction again. Although Joseph Smith's designation of Brigham Young was one of the apostles may have circumvented the process of having Cowdery, Whitmer, and Harris select the 12, it is likely that the three worked together with Joseph Smith to choose the apostles either before the February meeting or during a 1-hour recess that occurred during this session. In 1848, Cowdery told Brigham Young that he and Whitmer had originally chosen Phineas Young as a member of the 12, but that Joseph Smith made an urgent request that his brother William Smith be selected instead. Brother David and myself yielded to his wish. Cowdery told Brigham Young and consented for William to be selected. In an 1885 interview, Whitmer gave a similar account, explaining that he and Cowdery were appointed a committee to select the apostles, but that Joseph Smith, quote, insisted that his brother William Smith should be put in as it was the only way by which he could be saved, unquote. The actual selection process of the 12, then, was a likely collaboration between Joseph Smith, Cowdery, Whitmer, and Harris. I think that's being a little generous, but that's what you get from the historical introduction. And then you get the 12 ordained. So, according to Heber C. Kimball, the ordinations were performed by Cowdery, Whitmer, and Harris, and then confirmed by the presidency of the high priesthood. These accounts indicate that Joseph Smith was involved in at least some capacity with the actual ordinations, as were Cowdery, Whitmer, and Harris. So we get this from the minutes. After an appropriate and affecting prayer was made, the brethren who went to Zion were requested to take their seats together in one part of the house by themselves. President Smith arose and stated the reason why this meeting was called. It was this: God had commanded it, and it was made known to him by vision and by the Holy Spirit. Then he starts speaking about Science Camp and the things that happened therein. And then we get this from the meeting minutes. He said God had not designed all this for nothing, but he had it in remembrance yet. And those who went to Zion with a determination to lay down their lives if necessary, it was the will of God that they should be ordained to the ministry and go forth to prune my vineyard for the last time, or the coming of the Lord, which was nigh. Even 56 years should wind up the scene. Okay. Now, there's a revelation a little later on that talks about, hey, Joseph, if you live to a certain age, right, then you're going to see the second coming. Now, I did a little math here. This is 1835. 56 years after that would have been 1891. And had Joseph survived, he would have had to have been 86 years old by that time. Now, to put that into perspective, if you're looking at me here, down at the bottom here, you see the Joseph Smith papers. Above that, you see the Journal of Discourses. And that, I think, only really goes to 1888 or 1889. I'm on my last volume. But like it even goes beyond that. So I find this interesting that they really thought that the second coming was going to happen at that time. So there you were. If he would have lived to 86 years old, right? So then the meeting dismisses for an hour, and Hiram calls everybody back to order, and they light right into the 12 apostles. So we get this from the minutes. The first business of the meeting was for the 3 witnesses of the Book of Mormon to pray each one and then proceed to choose 12 men from the church as apostles to go to all nations, kindreds, tongues, and people. The 3 witnesses united in prayer, viz. Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris. These 3 witnesses were then blessed by the laying on of the hands of the presidency. They then, according to a former commandment, proceeded to make choice of the 12. The names are as follows: Lyman Johnson, Brigham Young, H.C. Kimball, Orson Hyde, David W. Patton, Luke Johnson, William E. McClellan, John F. Boynton, Orson Pratt, W.M. or William Smith, Thomas B. Marsh, and Parley P. Pratt. Blessings are enumerated for each one of these, and it seems like they would come up, and how this would happen is they would come up 3 at a time and be blessed by a witness, one of the 3 witnesses, and then the next 3 show up and arrive and repeat, and that's basically how they did. So basically 3 would come up at a time. They would have one set of hands on each one of their heads, according to what I can divine here, and then the next 3 would come up, and that's how the 12 were chosen. The conference is adjourned until the next day. So now we're on Sunday, is 15th of February. And all of these blessings are all these blessings are written and given, and there's a zillion of them, and I'm going to skip them all because it's just a ton. So but they're all enumerated out, which I think is pretty fun. But a lot of it is like, I hereby call you, and you're going to be, you're going to have the power of the Spirit with you and the power of the priesthood and all those kind of things. So then we get a discourse from this meeting, which was given on the 15th of February, but we've already shown that. The next 9 entries in our timeline are the blessings giving to the 12 at this conference. So I'm going to skip that. And then we get the preface to the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants from the printed edition. So this was put together by the 12 who were called. So I find it interesting that one of their first items of business was actually to basically come up with a testimony page for the Doctrine and Covenants as we know it today. And now we get into section 107, which is pretty long, not the longest one we've had so far, but very long. Given over a long period of time, I can tell you that, and we'll follow the logic of the Joseph Smith papers on this one. So the first time we ever see this revelation pop up is actually back in 1831. So this is 4 years ago. And it is sandwiched in between sections 69 and 70 as what they call a partial revelation. So the earliest copy of this that we get is from Revelation Book 1. It's in the handwriting of John Whitmer. And it changes in the midst to Oliver Cowdery on the top of the second page. The partial means that that it begins on what we would now call verse 59 and goes to verse 100, or the very end of the Revelation. So the beginning part of it wasn't received until 1835 when it was about ready to be published. But just so that you know that we only got the back part of it back in 1831. We also get a copy found in Orson Hyde's copy, which is really in the Newell K. Whitney papers at BYU, again, handwriting of Orson Hyde. We get a copy in Revelation Book 2. This is the handwriting of Frederick G. Williams, and it is found in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. The full Revelation as we have it today appears in 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, Section 3, and it says on priesthood. And we also find it in the later manuscripts History of the Church. There you go. So some introductions to this revelation. Revelation Book 1 only says a revelation given at Hiram Portage County, November 11th, 1831. There was no introduction in the Hyde copy. Revelation Book 2 only says revelation given November 1831 in Cayuga County, Ohio, regulating the presidency of the church. Okay. There are some section heading differences, and even the dates are different here. So this is, I think, one of the more significant modern revelation changes that we see. So in 1981, what you used to read was Revelation on Priesthood given through Joseph Smith the prophet at Kirtland, Ohio, dated March 28, 1835. This is from the History of the Church, Volume 2. On the date, names of the 12 men in council, confessing their individual weaknesses and shortcomings, expressing repentance, and seeking the further guidance of the Lord. They were about to separate on missions to districts assigned. Although portions of this section were received on the date named, the historical records affirm that various parts were received at sundry times, some as early as November of 1831. Now, in modern scriptures, the section heading reads thusly: Revelation on the priesthood given through Joseph Smith the prophet at Kirtland, Ohio, about April 1835. Although this section was recorded in 1835, the historical records affirm that most of verses 60 through 100 incorporate a revelation given through Joseph Smith on November 11th, 1831. This section was associated with the organization of the Quorum of the 12 in February and March of 1835. The prophet likely delivered it in the presence of those who were preparing to depart May 3rd of 1835 on their first quorum mission. So before the 12 went out to teach and to do their big mission, this was received. So the historical introduction gives us a lot of good stuff here. It says, in March of 1835, Joseph Smith and the 12 apostles decided that because of the many pressing requests from the Eastern churches, the apostles would conduct a series of conferences in the Eastern United States. These conferences were held, quote, for the purpose of regulating all things necessary for the welfare of the branches of the church in those areas. It appears that sometime before the 12 departed on the 4th of May, 1835, to begin holding these conferences, Joseph Smith presented them with this instruction, which outlined information about priesthood and church governance. The document indicated that there were two major divisions of priesthood in the church, the Melchizedek priesthood and the Aaronic priesthood, and explained the responsibilities of the 12 apostles, the 70 bishops, and other officers in the church. This instruction was apparently meant to aid the 12 in their regulation of the eastern branches, while also providing detailed information about the responsibilities of priesthood officers. Like the earlier articles and covenants of the church, the instruction became an important document establishing significant doctrines in the governing bodies of the church and on the priesthood itself. So some of this revelation actually elaborated on section 84, which we've already done. The instruction on priesthood compiled information from previous Joseph Smith revelations. Much of the instruction came from a revelation Joseph Smith had dictated in November of 1831. According to some observers, Joseph Smith dictated other parts of the instruction as an 1835 revelation. Some of the instruction also elaborated on ideas first presented in a September 1832 revelation, indicating that Joseph Smith was gaining new understanding into concepts of priesthood and leadership. Oliver Cowdery, who assisted in calling the 12 and giving them their charge as apostles, was probably involved in the instructions preparation. Brigham Young later remembered Joseph Smith spending, quote, 2 hours laboring with Elder Cowdery to get him to write what Young called a revelation on priesthood, probably this instruction. Indeed, when the instruction was published in the 1835 edition of the Doctrine and Covenants, it was designated as an instruction on priesthood. So why don't we use the date from the 1981 section heading? Well, Heber C. Kimball remembered that Joseph Smith dictated the instruction on priesthood at a meeting of the 12 one evening after the apostles had been called, and most of them had been ordained. Kimball's account places the meeting sometime before the first week of April, 1835. A later Joseph Smith history placed this dictation on the 28th of March, 1835, and referenced a document recounting a meeting of the 12, where after a period of general confession, they made a written request that Joseph Smith obtain for them a revelation of God's mind and will concerning our duty in the coming season. The history states that Joseph Smith then dictated this instruction. However, this appears to be based on a misdating by the history's compilers, since the request to Joseph Smith, which was copied into Minute Book 1, is dated 28th of March, 1836, not 1835. In fact, Joseph Smith was not in Kirtland, Ohio in March of 1835. So, yeah, there you go. You got to write your names and dates down right. You just got to do it. All right, this is also kind of an upgrade to the Articles and Covenants, so we get this from the historical introduction. Although not covering all operations of church administration, the instruction captures information about the coordination of church governance between bishops, the presidency of the high priesthood, and newer offices such as the High Council, the 12 apostles, and the 70. It also gives specific names for the two priesthoods in the church, Melchizedek and for the higher priesthood, and Aaronic for the lower, and explains why these two names were applied to these priesthoods. The instruction explains that the presidency of the high priesthood has the right to officiate in all offices of the church and further illuminates the role of the bishop of the church, explaining that the bishopric is the presidency of the Aaronic priesthood. Essentially, this document updated the Articles and Covenants and other revelations on church administration and codified the roles for the new offices. So I would argue, personally, I believe that most of how the church really runs today comes from Section 107 instead of the Articles and Covenant. Because like I said, it just rounds it out. And as they have said, it kind of rounds it out. Some content and footnotes for this. The Revelation shares this with us. There are two divisions or grand heads. One is the Melchizedek priesthood and the other is the Aaronic or Levitical priesthood. Footnote 2 for this says, other religious leaders around this time also posited the existence of different types of priesthood. Alexander Crawford, a Scottish minister living in Canada, believed that three priesthoods existed anciently, a patriarchal priesthood after the order of Melchizedek, an Aaronic priesthood, and the priesthood held by Jesus Christ. Alexander Campbell of the Disciples of Christ also believed that the tribe of Levi held one priesthood and that Aaron and his sons held a high priesthood. So this idea of different priesthood heads and even what they were named after was not entirely unique to the church, but as you can see, also not the same. We also get this from the text. High priests, after the order of the Melchizedek priesthood, have a right to officiate in their own standing under the direction of the presidency in administering spiritual things, and also in the office of an elder, priest of the Levitical order, teacher, deacon, and member. Now, you're going to see this a lot in these revelations, so I thought this was a nice footnote here. What does member mean? Well, member here may refer to an official member of the church, a term used around this time to refer to a man who held any priesthood office in the church. It's kind of a blanket term, just to say member in good standing, more or less. Where do bishops come from? Well, we get this. The bishopric is the presidency of this priesthood and holds the keys or authority of the same. No man has a legal right to this office to hold the keys of this priesthood except he be a literal descendant of Aaron. But as a high priest of the Melchizedek priesthood, he has authority to officiate in all the lesser offices. He may officiate in the office of bishop when no literal descendant of Aaron can be found, provided he is called and set apart and ordained under this power by the hands of the presidency of the Melchizedek priesthood. Footnote 9 for this says, the earliest extant copy of the November 1831 revelation states that, quote, a bishop must be chosen from the high priesthood, unquote, and does not include the information here about literal descendants of Aaron or about the bishopric holding the keys of the lesser priesthood. In the March 1835 issue of the Latter-day Saints Messenger and Advocate, Oliver Cowdery stated that the priesthood of Aaron was conferred upon Aaron and his seed through their generations, and that if the literal descendants of Aaron were no more, then this priesthood was lost from Israel unless God bestows it upon another family. Thought that was interesting. And this is still done today. So if you are called to be a bishop in the church, that call comes from the first presidency, and you have to be a high priest in the Melchizedek priesthood, the high priesthood sort of portion of that. That is still done to this day. We get some instructions about first presidency. It says, of the Melchizedek priesthood, 3 presiding high priests chosen by the body, appointed and ordained to that office, and upheld by the confidence, faith, and prayer of the church, form a quorum of the presidency of the church. Now, this is a very different view of the presidency. So footnote 12 says this. At this time, the presidency of the high priesthood consisted of Joseph Smith, Oliver Cowdery, Sidney Rigdon, Frederick G. Williams, Hiram Smith, and Joseph Smith Sr. Apparently, the presence of only 3 of these men was necessary to form a quorum of the presidency. Now, I don't know if we would ever go back to that, but that's the idea, is that the presidency was this body, and then a few of them, at least 3, had to be around. In this day and age, we only have 3 at a time called to that, but I thought was kind of makes sense, quite frankly. We get this from the text. It is the duty of the 12 in all large branches of the church to ordain evangelical ministers, as they shall be designated unto them by revelation. Footnote 19 for this. Evangelical ministers likely means the office of patriarch, which Joseph Smith Sr. held. In a blessing recorded by Oliver Cowdery in September of 1835, the patriarchal priesthood is referred to as the evangelical priesthood. In addition, paragraph 28 of this instruction is included almost word for word in a recorded blessing that Joseph Smith gave Joseph Smith Sr., which states that as one ordained to the patriarchal priesthood, Joseph Smith Sr. was to gather together his posterity just as Adam had done. There is no record of the 12 ordaining any evangelical ministers while preaching in the eastern United States and upper Canada. However, what's funny is this is kind of flipped, where there is no presiding patriarch over the whole church anymore. There are only patriarchs or evangelical ministers, if you will, apparently, in each one of the stakes of the church. So that's kind of flipped around in recent times. And if you haven't seen the earlier version of this, I do a whole part of an episode about patriarchs and about how the most recent patriarch, I want to say, passed away less than 10 years ago. This is 2025, we're recording this, and he was like well into his hundreds. But he was the last presiding patriarch. He was emeritus at the time. But anyway, the whole script on this has been kind of flipped. All right, from the text, we also get this. 3 years previous to the death of Adam, he called Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalaleel, Jared, Enoch, and Methuselah, who were all high priests with the residue of his posterity, who were righteous, into the valley of Adam on Diamond, and there bestowed upon them his last blessing. And the Lord appeared unto them, and they rose up and blessed Adam, and called him Michael, the prince, the archangel. And the Lord administered comfort unto Adam, and he said unto him, I have set thee to be at the head. A multitude of nations shall come of thee, and thou art a prince over them forever. Footnote 32 for this says, this paragraph is included almost word for word in a blessing Joseph Smith gave to Joseph Smith Sr., which was recorded by Oliver Cowdery in September of 1835. And it says, this is what it says, for he shall assemble together his posterity like unto Adam, and the assembly which he called shall be an ensample for my father, for this it is written of him. And then you get this revelation section that I just said. And then after that, it says this, so shall it be with my father. He shall be called a prince over his posterity, holding the keys of the patriarchal priesthood over the kingdom of God on earth, even the church of the Latter-day Saints. And he shall sit in the general assembly of patriarchs, even in council with the Ancient of Days, when he shall sit and all the patriarchs with him, and shall enjoy his right and authority under the direction of the Ancient of Days. And this was a blessing episode where Joseph Smith gave blessings to his father, his mother, and a lot of that was recorded in the Patriarchal Blessing book, and that was written by the hand of Oliver Cowdery. And so the Ancient of Days, as we interpret it in the church, is Adam or Michael, which are synonymous together. So anyway, that was a very interesting insight. That he definitely attaches his own father to sitting in council with patriarchs through the ages, which I thought was interesting. Lots of footnotes comparing Revelation book 1 and 2 are in here, like just a ton of stuff back and forth about, oh, they use witched and they use who and, whatever. I'm going to skip over those. Now, one thing that's very interesting to me is that there is not any person to the church who is exempt from the council of the church. And so I find this interesting. It says, and inasmuch as a president of the high priesthood shall transgress, he shall be had in remembrance before the common council of the church. And footnote 48 to this says, that is, a council headed by the bishop, who is the common judge. So nobody's above the law here. That's written out in section 107. Let's talk about bishops over the Aaronic priesthood. It says, also the duty of the president over the priesthood of Aaron is to preside over 48 priests and sit in council with them and teach them the duties of their office or is given in the covenants. This president is to be a bishop, for this is one of the duties of this priesthood. So you get 48 at a time, and if you have more than that, you have to split it up. I don't know if you know that, but you do. Footnote 53 for this says, while a bishop was to preside over the priests, William Cowdery, who was not a bishop, was ordained on the 15th of January, 1836, quote, to preside over the priests of the Aaronic priesthood in Kurland. The practice of calling a president over the priests who was not a bishop continued in Nauvoo. However, as this instruction outlines, the bishop was still the presiding authority of the whole priesthood of Aaron. So apparently they used to have like priests, presidents that were not bishops, which is kind of a no-no today, but that's what they did. All right, what we would now call verse 32 reads this. It says, and again, the duty of the president of the office of the high priesthood is to preside over the whole church, and to be like unto Moses. Behold, here is wisdom, yea, to be a seer, a revelator, a translator, and a prophet, having all the gifts of God which he bestows upon the head of the church. Footnote 53 for this says, in an account of a 5th December 1834 meeting of the presidency of the high priesthood, Oliver Cowdery provided an explanation of the office of the president of the high priesthood. He stated, quote, the office of the president is to preside over the whole church, or to be considered as at the head, to receive revelations for the church, to be a seer, revelator, and prophet, having all the gifts of God, taking Moses for an ensample, which is the office and station of the above President Smith, according to the calling of God and the ordination which he has received, unquote. Joseph Smith was ordained to the president of the high priesthood on the 25th of January, 1832. So this is a while ago. And let's button it all up and talk about 70s. It says this, and it is according to the vision showing the order of the 70 that they should have 7 presidents to preside over them. Footnote 56 for this says, at the 14th February meeting where the 12 apostles were designated, Joseph Smith stated that the meeting had been called because, quote, God had commanded it, and it was made known unto him by vision, unquote. Joseph Young, who was called as one of the presidents of the 70, later remembered that a week before that 14th February meeting, Joseph Smith had told him and Brigham Young that he had received a revelation to appoint 12 apostles and to designate the 70. And that's all that we have for section 107. So as we move forward in our next portions here, we're going to be talking about section 108 and a very intense and very interesting story to me about a conflict between Joseph Smith and his brother William. So stick around. Okay, in our final portion here, we're going to be talking about section 108 and the things leading up to it. So chronologically, we get actually a couple of revelations in the midst of all this that we've already talked about. So we get an evening and morning star version of section 68, and then we get the printing of the original section 27 from the Doctrine and Covenants. Just to kind of let you know, there's some sort of revelations smattered in there chronologically because some changes were made to them. So let's get into a few things here. There's a lot of stuff going on in church history. So this is kind of the rest of 1835. We're going to stop right before the year ends. But the first thing we see is a recommendation for Edward Partridge and Isaac Morley, voicing for their character, their positions in the church, and their trustworthiness. All right. So got to have it written down or else I don't trust you. All right. And it is signed by Joseph Smith and others. After this, we get letters to John Burke, Sally Waterman Phelps, and Almira Mack Scooby. Love that name. These are on the 1st and 2nd of June, 1835. And really what this was a big letter to the members in Clay County, Missouri. They were kicked out of Independence. They're in Clay now. Signed by Joseph Smith and others. It clarifies the duty of priesthood offices, gives some instruction on managing church affairs. And then there are specific messages to Sally Phelps, which is William W. Phelps's wife, and Almira, who is Joseph Smith's cousin. She's a Mac, right? So it's on his mother's side. But anyway, Almira, not Elvira. Way different person. So anyway, the next thing we get is a letter to John Hewitt, which is on the 14th of June, which is really a follow-up letter. So John came to Kirtland, had a short meeting with Joseph, who explained the beliefs of the church. John had problems with the Book of Mormon and said he would follow up, which he didn't do. So we get this letter sent off to say, hey, you said you were going to follow up on this and to see if he wanted to learn any more about it, which he never did. But I thought that was interesting because missionaries do that today. Like, hey, we came by, we shared with you the Book of Mormon. I'm going to come back and you're probably not going to answer the door or be home. So, nice to know it wasn't just modern missionaries that had to go through that. The next letter we get is from Oliver Cowdery, letting us know that John wasn't home. So he left the letter with his wife. So there you go there. Then we get a letter to the church, brethren, just kind of in general, on the 15th of June. This one's signed by Joseph Smith, and it explains that they are about to publish the Bible revisions, and so they needed to raise funds in order to publish that. So this is the Old and New Testaments that Joseph revised, which we now call the Joseph Smith translation, or the inspired version, depending on who you talk to. We get a letter to the editor of who else but the Painesville Telegraph. My gosh. We keep coming back to Painesville. Joseph had been in court over an assault and battery charge. Would you like that? Which the Telegraph, of course, shared very generously about. But he was acquitted, which for some reason they forgot to print, which is really weird. So you write a letter to the editor and you say, please follow up your story and don't just give a half-sided thing to this, please, Painesville Telegraph. I love it. I need to go to Painesville sometime and just give them a big hug. I think they're great. Anyway, we get a license for Evan Green, which we also, we get an ordination of Cyrus Smalling. And then we get section 68 as we have it today. Now, we've already had a whole episode about that, so we're not going to get into that, skipping that. And we get a daybook entry from John Smith, keeping an accounting of a few things, just making sure that everything's accounted properly with money. After that, we get the certificate from Michael Chandler. All right, this is the 6th of July, 1835. Now, here it is. This is who is Michael Chandler? You're about to find out. This is a major thing. Kirtland, July 6th, 1835. This is to make known to all who may be desirous concerning the knowledge of Mr. Joseph Smith, Jr. in deciphering the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphic characters in my possession, which I have in many eminent cities shown to the most learned. And from the information that I could ever learn or meet with, I find that of Mr. Joseph Smith, Jr. to correspond in the most minute manners. Signed by Michael H. Chandler. So Michael H. Chandler acquires some mummies and papyri, hears about Joseph Smith in Ohio. They meet. Joseph displayed his ability to translate these characters, and so Chandler gave this certificate. Now, I think this might ring true of when Mr. Martin Harris went off to New York and tried to get the same kind of thing about characters and translation. This was a little bit more of a positive experience. Anyway, so there you go. This papyri, if you don't know, becomes what we now call the Book of Abraham, and it is canonized in our scriptures in the Pearl of Great Price. We get some meetings happening on the 14th of July, where we have some disciplinary councils held against elders of the church. Maybe not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Then we get a letter to Sally Phelps in Joseph's own hand and signature. The original one is missing, but we have this photograph. But that's interesting. So we used to have it. I guess somebody used to have it, and they photographed it, and that's gone, but we still have the photograph. So, don't delete those photos either. This is a letter of encouragement while W.W. Phelps is away on a mission. So this is Joseph Smith telling Sally he's okay, everything's going to be fine, he's doing the Lord's work, this kind of and so forth. We get a letter to the 12, actually chastising them for not fundraising for the needs of the church. So that wasn't a pleasant letter. We get then after this 4 meetings over the next few days, and this is ordaining brethren to their callings. Elder Cahoon gets called to the carpet because he is not raising his kids right, which he confesses to. That's a little personal. And then on the 17th, we get the council meeting to publish something called the Book of Commandments and Covenants. Now, that's a working title that's going to be published. And they form a committee to publish it. So the very next meeting that we get, they have another meeting and ordain more people to callings. And those are the meetings that we have. So the Book of Commandments and Covenants. We'll work on that. We're getting close, right? Then we get a letter sent to Clay County elders or church members with priesthood callings, if you will, telling them that they're all under condemnation for one thing or another and need to repent. Okay. And then we get section 27, which is the next thing that we get, and the Doctrine and Covenants, but we already did that one, so we're going to skip it. So that's where we get to this point. Now, we get a really big meeting. So I'm going to pause here for a second. We're going to not pause here, but I'm going to dive in a little bit into this, or as we say, double click into this little meeting. Happens on September 14th, 1835. It's a really big deal, so I'll just read it. It was decided that as the laborer is worthy of his hire, whenever President Joseph Smith Sr. is called upon to pronounce patriarchal blessings upon the church, he be paid for his time at the rate of $10 per week, and his expenses found. It was further decided that President Frederick G. Williams be appointed and hereafter serve as scribe to attend blessing meetings, and that he receive for his services at the same ratio, having his expenses borne also. It was further decided that President Oliver Cowdery be appointed and that he act hereafter as recorder for the church. It was further decided that Sister Emma Smith proceed to make a selection of sacred hymns according to the revelation, and that President William W. Phelps be appointed to revise and arrange them for printing. Oliver County Clerk. Not a big deal, but for heaven's sakes, the patriarchal office is set forth officially. Frederick G. Williams is scribing. They get paid $10 a week to do it, plus their expenses. Oliver is now the recorder. Emma's going to put together a hymnal, and William W. Phelps is going to publish it. This was a really big deal, and it was really short, so that's all you get. But I thought that was worth noting. That's where your hymnal comes from, is that official meeting. Now, you may know that the revelation was given years ago, but there's been a couple of issues since then. But now it's time, so we're going to do it. And they do it in Kirtland, Ohio. It's a very small book. In fact, I have it here. If you're watching, this is a replica of how small this little hymnal was. And if I open up this front page here, it will say Kirtland, 1835, published by William W. Phelps. Or printed by William W. Phelps, but selected by Emma Smith. So kind of cool. Anyway, enough about that. We get some more summaries here. We get a deed from Frederick G. Williams and his wife. This is Kirtland land going to Joseph. We get a meeting on September 16th where we have a few people being rebuked and discipline is dished out. But Sylvester Smith kept the minutes. So maybe he had a little turnaround, but I think he also kind of scratched out some details that he didn't like from previous minutes. People are just people. After this, we get a note that David Whitmer and Samuel Smith are now over the literary firm of the church. This is printing scriptures. This is, doing all that kind of stuff, printing newspapers. But they're over that now. That's a note. We now get a meeting on September 19th to find out if Jared Carter went too far in rebuking members in Freedom, New York. All right. after they didn't donate very much to the cause of building the house of the Lord in Kirtland. Now, Carter was actually rebuked and apologized. He went a little too far by saying, "You guys have failed the church by not giving us enough money for the temple." So there you go. All right. I promised my wife I wouldn't do this, but I'm going to totally do this. We get 5 published revelations in a row. All right. Now, the first one is going to happen on 1st of November, 1835. This was written by Warren Parrish in Joseph Smith's journal. So Warren Parrish is the handwriting here. And the text reads this. We read unpublished revelations. Verily thus saith the Lord unto me, his servant Joseph Smith Jr., mine anger is kindled against my servant Reynolds Cahoon, because of his iniquities, his covetous, and dishonest principles in himself and family, and he doth not purge them, even as it seemeth good in my sight. Therefore go and declare unto him these words. Okay, and the footnote for this says that Reynolds said, "You know what, you're right," and he trued himself up and changed his ways. I thought that was pretty intense. November 2nd, revelation. Next day, same journal, same scribe. It says, "Thus came the word of the Lord unto me, saying, It is not my will that my servant Frederick should go to New York, but inasmuch as he wishes to go and visit his relatives, that he may warn them to flee the wrath to come, let him go and see them. For that purpose, and let that be his only business. And behold, in this thing he shall be blessed with power, while to overcome their prejudices. Verily, thus saith the Lord, Amen." Historical introduction for this says, this revelation dictated by Joseph Smith on the 2nd of November settled a disagreement among church leaders about who should travel to New York to purchase bookbinding equipment and texts for the new Hebrew school in Kirtland, Ohio. Apparently, Oliver Cowdery and Frederick G. Williams were the 2 candidates. The revelation featured here directed Frederick G. Williams not to go to New York on church business and instead authorized him to travel to preach to his relatives. Oliver Cowdery was ultimately chosen to go to New York. So who's going shopping? Oliver's going shopping, thus saith the Lord. All right, 3rd of November, revelation. Journal and scribe totally the same. Text reads thusly, "Thus came the word of the Lord unto me, saying, concerning the 12, Behold, they are under condemnation, because they have not been sufficiently humble in my sight, and in consequence of their covetous desires, and that they have not dealt equally with each other in the division of the monies which came into their hands. Nevertheless, some of them dealt equally, therefore they shall be rewarded. But verily I say unto you, they must all humble themselves before me, before they will be accounted worthy to receive an endowment, to go forth in my name unto all nations. As for my servant William Smith, let the 11 humble themselves in prayer and in faith, and wait on me in patience. And my servant William shall return, and I will yet make him a polished shaft in my quiver, in bringing down the wickedness and abominations of men, and there shall be none mightier than he in his day and generation. Nevertheless, if he repent not speedily, he shall be brought low, and shall be chastened sorely for all his iniquities he has committed against me. Nevertheless, the sin which he hath sinned against me is not even now more grievous than the sin with which my servant David W. Patton and my servant Orson Hyde and my servant William E. McClellan have sinned against me, and the residue are not sufficiently humble before me. Behold, the parable which I spake concerning a man having 12 sons. For what man among you having 12 sons, and is no respecter to them, and they serve him obediently, and he saith unto this one, Be thou clothed in robes, and sit thou here, and to the other, Be thou clothed in rags, and sit thou there, and looketh upon his sons, and saith, I am just. Ye will answer and say, No, man. And ye answer truly. Therefore, verily, thus saith the Lord your God, I appointed these 12 that they should be equal in their ministry, and in their portion, and in their evangelical rights. Wherefore they have sinned a very grievous sin, inasmuch as they have made themselves unequal, and have not hearkened unto my voice. Therefore let them repent speedily, and prepare their hearts for the solemn assembly, and for the great day which is to come. Verily, thus saith the Lord. Amen. And this is in response to quite a lot of tension going on among the 12 and the first presidency between those groups. So, all right, after this, we get same journal, same scribe. New Revelation says this. The word of the Lord came to me, saying, Behold, I am well pleased with my servant Isaac Morley and my servant Edward Partridge, because of the integrity of their hearts, in laboring in my vineyard for the salvation of the souls of men. Verily I say unto you, their sins are forgiven them. Therefore say unto them in my name, that it is my will that they should tarry for a little season, and attend the school, and also the solemn assembly, for a wise purpose in me. Even so, amen. So there's a revelation to those two. Day after, we get the same place, journal and scribe, but it says this. The word of the Lord came unto me, saying that President Phelps and President J. Whitmer are under condemnation before the Lord for their iniquities. That's it. That's a bummer. Like, anything else? Nope, that's all you get. So that's all we have left over anyway. So, wow. Unpublished revelations galore going on here. Now, a few more summaries. We get a, and I love this story, and I would go into this so long, but it's going to be too long. This is what's called in the Joseph Smith papers, Conversations with Robert Matthews, and this spans over some time. So this one, again, it takes a lot of constraint for me not to tell this story, but this is from Joseph Smith's journal. So this guy was just in jail. He gets out. He goes to Kirtland under a fake name, stays with Joseph for 2 days. Joseph tells him all about the faith. He talks about the first vision. He talks about the gold plates. And then as the day goes on, Joseph kicks him out of his house. And the newspapers in the area start saying that they're conspiring to each other. Anyway, lots of sleaze, a little drama. It was a lot of fun. Anyway, so this guy shows up. He's impersonating somebody else. And like Joseph shares all this stuff. And he's like, hey, wait a minute. You're whatever. Get out of my house. And like kicks him out. And I think sends some messages out to the papers like saying, yeah, we're not in cahoots with each other at all. We get another unpublished revelation. All right. So the 14th of November, we get this from Joseph Smith's journal, Warren Parrish's hands. So a good place to get revelations lately. Text reads this. Thus came the word of the Lord unto me, saying, Verily thus saith the Lord unto my servant Joseph, concerning my servant Warren Parrish. Behold, his sins are forgiven him, because of his desires to do the works of righteousness. Therefore, inasmuch as he will continue to hearken unto my voice, he shall be blessed with wisdom and with a sound mind, even above his fellows. Behold, it shall come to pass in his day that he shall see great things shoot forth themselves unto my people. He shall see much of my ancient records, and shall know of hidden things, and shall be endowed with a knowledge of hidden things. And if he desires, he shall seek it at my hand. He shall be privileged with writing much of my word, as a scribe unto me for the benefit of my people. Therefore, this shall be his calling, until I shall order it otherwise in my wisdom, and it shall be said of him in a time to come, Behold, Warren, the Lord's scribe, for the Lord's seer, whom he hath appointed in Israel. Therefore, if he will keep my commandments, he shall be lifted up at the last day. Even so, amen. Now, it's kind of fun to have a revelation and to be the one who actually records it and writes it down. So there you go, Warren Parrish. Even more summaries we get. We get an open letter to the elders in the Messenger and Advocate telling them to make sure that they check with the head of the household in preaching the gospel, as well as a caution on preaching to slaves and servants at this time. This is a revelation that you're going to get later in the history. We get a letter in Revelation to Harvey Whitlock on the 16th of November, which has to do with Harvey repenting and wishing to come back to the church. So the Revelation states this. Verily thus saith the Lord unto you, let him who was my servant Harvey return unto me, and unto the bosom of my church, and forsake all the sins wherewith he has offended against me, and pursue from henceforth a virtuous and upright life, and remain under the direction of those whom I have appointed, to be pillars and heads of my church. And behold, thus saith the Lord your God, his sins shall be blotted out from under heaven, and shall be forgotten from among men. and shall not come up in mine ears, nor be recorded as a memorial against him. But I will lift him up as out of a deep mire, and he shall be exalted upon the high places, and shall be counted worthy to stand among princes, and shall yet be made a polished shaft in my quiver, of bringing down the strongholds of wickedness among those who set themselves up on high, that they may take counsel against me and against anointed ones in the last days. Therefore let him prepare himself speedily and come unto you, even to Kirtland, and inasmuch as he shall hearken unto all your counsel from henceforth, he shall be restored unto his former state, and shall be saved unto the uttermost, even as the Lord your God liveth. Amen. So there you go. A little revelation to Harvey Whitlock. We get another revelation, unpublished revelation, so many of these, from the journal with Parish's, the sort of journal parish combo here. This is from the 16th of November, and it reads, "The word of the Lord came unto me, saying that Mr. Holmes had better not be baptized here, and that he had better not return by water, also that there were 3 men that were seeking his destruction, to beware of his enemies." What the heck are you talking about, and who is Mr. Holmes? Well, he came to visit, had dinner with Joseph Smith, saw the mummies, heard all about the doctrines and rise of the church, and then this revelation tells this visiting man, Mr. Holmes, don't get baptized right now, and that you've got some enemies that are going to come and get you. Now, I don't know about you, but that is the first time I've ever heard of especially a prophet saying, "Oh, you want to be baptized? Yeah, don't do that in Kirtland. Maybe do it somewhere else, but not here." So I thought that was quite notable. All right, here's some of the last summaries we have for this little portion, maybe. All right, we get 3 marriage licenses for different couples that Joseph Smith officiated for, which is fun. We get the minutes from a meeting on the 22nd of November. And in the introduction, this is about Andrew Squires, and I thought this was a fun story. Despite his proselyting success, sometime between April 1835 and conference and this November 27 meeting, Squires mailed his priesthood license back to Joseph Smith and joined the Methodists. Okay. So I guess after he mailed his license back and joined the Methodists, he came back and said he wanted to be a member of the church again. He got a stern talking to, but he was restored to being an elder in the church, and he started proselyting again for the church. So I'm going to leave. Now I'm going to come back. All is well. Let's get going. Let's go back on our mission. So there you go. All right. We also get a marriage license for Newell Knight and Lydia Goldwaith. And by the way, her descendants are the ones that held a lot of the papers that we have from Newell Knight, which is kind of fun. That was performed by Joseph Smith. We get the Book of Abraham manuscript. So this is between July and November of 1835. It is what you would now call Abraham chapter 1, verse 4 through chapter 2, verse 6, in what we would call today. So the Book of Abraham manuscript was scribed by Frederick G. Williams, and Joseph pulled this from the papyri of the mummies. That's where he says that he translated that from. And we get a few hieroglyphics off here in the margins. So I thought that was really interesting. Now, I'm not going to read off to you the Book of Abraham, just like I didn't read off to you the Book of Mormon. But yeah, that's him. After Michael Chandler sort of certified it, he sold it to him. He used his powers to create what we now have as the Book of Abraham. We get a letter to elders on the 1st of December, which is now, and this is sort of a general thing, of course, general letter. It says it's about baptism and the parables of Jesus. He also responded to Eber Howe and Alexander Campbell and all of their opposition and sort of answered the question of some of their opposition. If you remember, Eber Howe, if you don't remember, is, I'm saying remember a lot. Sorry about that. But he writes Mormonism Unveiled. And so I don't think that's something that the Latter-day Saints appreciated at the time. We get a letter to the messenger and advocate editor to please ask that people pay their postage before sending him loads of mail, because that's a lot of money to be paying a postman. You're just sending your mail. Now, at the time, you could just send a letter, and either you could pay the postage or you could have the other person do it, and everybody was just sending it to Joseph. And he basically was like, knock it off. I don't have enough money to pay for all your postage. Pay your own stuff. Now we don't do that in the United States. We have to post it first. All right. We had another marriage license, and then we get a letter from Orson Hyde explaining that there were still some conflicts among the 12, and there's some detail that we get around that. And then we get into a very interesting story, and I'm going to try to be brief about this, but this is pretty intense. This is a letter from William Smith. So I'm going to give you the historical introduction to this. After months of tension, the brothers, William and Joseph Smith, came to blows on the 16th of December, following another session of the debating school. After the evening's formal discussion had concluded, an argument commenced, in the words of Joseph Smith's journal, quote, upon the impropriety of continuing the school. The journal records that Hiram raised the issue, but when William insisted that he would not allow any man to speak ill of the school in his house, Joseph Smith apparently took exception. Despite Joseph Smith Sr.'s attempt to intervene, a war of words quickly devolved into physical confrontation. As Joseph Smith was removing his jacket, William attacked him. Though the exact nature of the fight is unclear, it appears several men were involved, including Jared Carter, a member of the Kirtland High Council. In the end, Joseph Smith left the house, quote, bruised and wounded, and unable to sit or rise up without help. Joseph Smith's history described him being grieved beyond expression at the wickedness of his brother, who, Cain-like, had sought to kill him. Further into this we get, news of Joseph Smith and William's physical and verbal fights reverberated through the Kirtland community. For church members, William's attack on a man considered a prophet was a serious matter. The 12 quickly summoned their colleague, William, to a council meeting to account for his behavior. The following day, William penned a letter to Joseph Smith in which he pleaded for his brother's forgiveness. And that's the letter. We're not going to read it. But I've also read another story where Joseph was taking off, and it was like, here's the mantle, like, the fireplace. Joseph turns away from William, takes his jacket off, kind of facing the mantelpiece, and William cheap shots him from behind into the mantle. I mean, really hurt him bad. And that started this brawl, which involved several grown men. Then you get a letter to William Smith, and the historical introduction for this says, shortly after his dramatic confrontation with his younger brother, William Smith, on the 16th of December, Joseph Smith responded to a contrite letter he had received from William. According to his journal, Joseph Smith had spent the day after the fight at home feeling quite unwell. On the following morning, Hiram visited Joseph Smith's Kirtland, Ohio home. Hiram had also received an apologetic letter from William, which he read aloud to Joseph Smith. Hiram and Joseph Smith apparently spent the remainder of the morning discussing their younger brother's troubling behavior and his future welfare. This fight deeply wounded the Smith family. When Joseph Smith Sr. and Lucy Knight called on Joseph Smith the evening of December 17, they were sorely afflicted in mind on the account of that occurrence. Hiram felt that Joseph Smith was justified in rebuking their younger brother, and he felt wounded to the very soul with the conduct of William. Despite the physical injuries that William had inflicted on him, Joseph Smith expressed concern for his brother's spiritual welfare and optimism about his capacity to change. Now, I don't want to go into the whole letter, but if you ever want to hear about Joseph did this a little while ago. So he's on a mission, he's traveling, somebody breaks their ankle, he has to stay with him. And then you get these letters to Emma where he kind of starts falling apart a little bit. And it's a little too much. This, I would argue, is another instance of that. So I'm going to give you a few things from this letter. I saw that your indignation was kindled against me, and you made towards me. I was not then to be moved, and I thought to pull off my loose coat, lest it should tangle me, and you be left to hurt me, but not with the intention of hurting you. But you, as too soon for me, having once fallen into the hands of a mob, and now been wounded in my side, and now into the hands of my brother, my side gave way, and after having been rescued from your grasp, I left your house with feelings that were indescribable. So William hit him in the same place that a mob attacked him, and that's one of the reasons why I gave out on him, and he was so sore, apparently. Further into this we get, but alas, abuse, anger, malice, hatred, and rage, with a lame side, with marks of violence heaped upon my body, me by my brother, were the reflections of my disappointment. And with these I returned home, not able to sit down or rise up without help, but through the blessings of God I am now better. But to mangle the flesh or seek revenge upon one who never done you any wrong cannot be a source of sweet reflection to you nor to me, neither to an honorable father and mother, brothers and sisters, And when we reflect with what care our parents and with what unremitting diligence our parents have strove to watch over us, and how many hours of sorrow and anxiety they have spent over our cradles and bedsides in times of sickness, how careful we ought to be of their feelings in their old age, it cannot be a source of sweet reflection to us to say or do anything that will bring their gray hairs down with sorrow to the grave. So this was a very major deal. Two brothers fighting, and it got really ugly. So, but they very publicly wrote letters to each other and very publicly apologized. And now we are in section 108. This is kind of a short one, so we'll be done soon. The earliest copy is once again in Joseph Smith's journal. This journal is very important. It's actually the handwriting in this case of Frederick G. Williams. It is published in Journals Volume 1, if you ever want to read it from the actual Joseph Smith papers, and it's a really clean copy. We also get a copy in the History from 1834 to 1836, which is also published in the Histories Volume 1. And it shows up in the manuscript history kept after Joseph had passed away. So not a whole lot of copies that we get. So circumstantial introduction for this. We get a journal entry for a little while because this is in a journal. We get a story about people coming to talk to leaders of the church over Christmas, which is very lovely. And then the earliest journal entry gives us this introduction directly, which says, the following is a revelation given to Lyman Sherman on this day, 26th of December, 1835. And I am also the amateur historian and don't know if Boxing Day was a thing by then. I don't think Christmas Carol was a thing by then anyway, but what do I know? Moving on. The history gives us this. Elder Lyman Sherman called and requested the word of the Lord through his servant Joseph, or our author. He, Sherman, said that he had been wrought upon for a long time to make known his feelings to him, Joseph, with an assurance from the Lord that he would give him a revelation which should make known his duty. The following is a revelation given to Lyman Sherman through Joseph Smith, Jr., this 26th day of December, 1835. So that's what you get out of the history remark. And the modern section headings that we get only add that Lyman was a high priest. So it used to be that he was a 70, but then in 2013 they added high priest and 70. Anyway, so that's the only change that we get there. From the historical introduction, we get this. On the morning after Christmas Day in 1835, Lyman Sherman, one of the presidents, do that again. On the morning after Christmas Day in 1835, Lyman Sherman, one of the presidents of the 70, asked Joseph Smith to petition God for a revelation that should make known his duty. In response, Joseph Smith dictated this revelation. Sherman, then 31 years old, had distinguished himself as a faithful Latter-day Saint prior to his request. He joined the church in western New York in January of 1832 and relocated his family 120 miles west to Kirtland, Ohio. Sometime around June of 1833, Sherman marched to Missouri in May of 1834 and was with about 200 others as part of the Camp of Israel expedition. In February of 1835, he was called as one of the presidents of the 7 presidents over the 70, a newly established priesthood office. In his ordination blessing, Sherman was told, quote, "Your ministry shall be great, and you shall proclaim to various nations. Your faith shall be unshaken, and you shall be delivered from great afflictions," unquote. At a May 1835 conference, church leaders voted that Sherman, along with other presidents of the 70, should, quote, "hold himself in readiness to go at the call of the 12 when the Lord opens the way," unquote. Sherman likely left Kirtland during the summer of 1835 to preach in local communities, though he may have remained in Kirtland and prepared himself to preach as he had been instructed. So you ask and you receive. We get this from the historical introduction. On the 26th of December, Sherman called on Joseph Smith as he was studying Hebrew with Frederick G. Williams and Warren Parrish. According to Joseph Smith's journals, Sherman entered the room in which they were studying and asked, quote, to have the word of the Lord through Joseph Smith. Quote, "I have been wrought upon to make known to you my feelings and desires," he told Joseph Smith, adding that he had been promised by the Lord that I should have a revelation which should make known my duty. Sometime before the end of the day, Joseph Smith dictated a revelation, presumably to Williams, who was acting temporarily as Joseph Smith's scribe, that addressed Sherman's concerns. Williams later copied this revelation into Joseph Smith's Jr. That copy, which is the earliest extant version, is featured here. So for content and footnotes, you get 2 footnotes, and this is what you get. So the Revelation says, "Wait patiently until the time when the solemn assembly shall be called of my servants. Then you shall be numbered with the first of mine elders and receive right by ordination with the rest of mine elders whom I have chosen." Footnote to this: in the Old Testament, a solemn assembly was, quote, a holy convocation of individuals. For Latter-day Saints in 1835, the term had become closely associated with the house of the Lord at Kirtland. The house of the Lord was dedicated on the 27th of March, 1836, and on the 30th of March, a group of 300 men met there to participate in a solemn assembly. The text also gives us, "It shall be fulfilled upon you in that day that you shall have right to preach my gospel wheresoever I shall send you from henceforth from that time." Footnote 2 for this says, during the 30th of March, 1836 solemn assembly, Sherman and the other members of the 70 were instructed, quote, "Go to Zion, if they please, or go wheresoever they will, and preach the gospel, and let the redemption of Zion be our object," unquote. So as an aftermath for this, who was Lyman Royal Sherman? Well, he was born in Vermont. He married Dalcina Didamina Johnson in upstate New York. They have fabulous names. Anyway, baptized January of 1832. He was part of the Camp of Israel. He was the presidency of the 70, but a really sad note here. He was appointed to the Quorum of the 12, but he died in Far West before he was told about the appointment, and he was never actually ordained. So kind of a sad story there. And that's all that we have for today. I have blown through basically a year and a half of church history. I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you so much for sticking with us. We have just a few more episodes left, really, compared to what we've already done. And hopefully you've been appreciating all these summaries, all these unpublished revelations here on Filling in the History. We'll see you next time.